You wake up, scroll your phone, and somewhere between a dopamine-choked meme and a video of a cat slapping a toddler, it hits you, that weird, heavy feeling in your chest. It's not new. It's not dramatic. Just a dull ache. An emotional hangover from a conversation you replayed 12 times last night, complete with an imaginary Oscar for best comeback he never said. And as you lay there scrolling and suffocating, you wonder why this tiny human interaction felt like being emotionally mugged in broad daylight. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Cute, right? It's the kind of quote you print on a pillow and then never look at because you're too busy Googling, "Why do I care what my ex thinks of my haircut?" But Jung wasn't speaking metaphorically. He meant it. The path to who you really are, your actual self, not the cardboard cutout version you show the world, is paved in rejection, discomfort, and the eerie silence that follows the moment you finally speak your truth and no one claps. See, emotional pain isn't your enemy. It's your teacher. But the problem is, most of us mistake the teacher for God. We obey it, worship it, build our lives around it. Pain says, "Don't speak up or they'll leave," and you say, "Yes, master." Pain says, "Stay small, stay silent," and you shrink, obediently, loyally, even proudly. Historians still argue whether Jung's concept of individuation was primarily mystical or psychological, but in either case, he saw pain as essential to becoming whole. Not because it makes you stronger, but because it strips you of every lie you believed about yourself. Imagine this, you're 8 years old and someone laughs at you for crying. Flash forward 20 years and now you apologize every time you show emotion. Not because you're weak, but because your brain built a whole religion around avoiding humiliation. You didn't just feel pain, you bowed to it. Built a little altar, lit a few candles, called it being realistic. But what if pain was never meant to be the deity, just the annoying classmate who shows up uninvited and somehow teaches you more than any teacher ever could? Here's the twist, your pain isn't even accurate. It's ancient. It's pre-verbal. It's your mom's silence, your dad's anger, your first breakup, and that time a teacher called you lazy instead of traumatized. Pain didn't start when someone ghosted you last week. It started the first time someone made you feel invisible and your nervous system made a note, feeling equals danger. And now, every time you feel, your whole body lights up like a haunted house. That coworker's passive-aggressive email. That's not just annoying, it's 30 years of being misunderstood screaming through your bones. That friend who didn't text back. That's abandonment with a side of "why am I never enough?" Here's your first uncomfortable truth bomb. Most of your emotional pain is not current. It's a backlog, a psychic junk drawer. And just like your actual junk drawer, it's full of stuff that doesn't belong to you. So no, you're not too sensitive. You're just finally aware. And awareness, as you'll come to learn, feels suspiciously like losing your mind at first. Because becoming aware of your emotional pain isn't about banishing it. It's about watching it walk into the room, sit on your couch, eat your chips, and not let it drive your car afterward. There's an old psychological joke that goes, your childhood trauma called, it says you still its emergency contact. Dark. Absolutely. Accurate. Tragically, yes. Because until you face the pain, it drives everything. You date from it. You parent from it. You set your goals from it. You choose your silence from it. And then you wonder why you feel like you're always at war with yourself. But you're not broken, you're just fluent in survival. Pain taught you a language. Now you're unlearning it, syllable by bloody syllable. The question is, are you still obeying pain? Or are you finally listening to it? Jung believed that healing wasn't about feeling better, it was about becoming more yourself. And sometimes, that self is awkward, angry, quiet, loud, afraid, and oddly obsessed with doom-scrolling psychology memes at 2 a.m. You don't need to banish emotional pain. You need to dethrone it. Let it sit in the passenger seat, maybe even DJ a little, but stop letting it drive. Because when you realize pain is a messenger, not a master, you stop building your life around avoiding it. And that's when something shocking happens, it hurts less. Not because it goes away, but because it stops defining you. That comment your partner made still stings. That family member who won't change, still frustrating. But you stop assuming their behavior means something about you. That's the shift. That's the immunity. Not numbness, freedom. And you don't get there by affirmations alone. You get there by sitting with pain until it loses its grip. You watch it like a documentary. Yes, here comes the classic "I'm a failure" montage. Stunning cinematography. Weak plot. Because you are not your pain. You are the one watching it. You don't become emotionally immune by turning into a robot. You don't heal by shutting down like a Windows 98 machine after a long day of running trauma.exe. But let's be honest, that's what most people think detachment means. Cold, harsh, unfeeling, the emotional equivalent of a tax auditor with no sense of rhythm. So when you start pulling away from toxic relationships, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself, what happens? You feel like the villain. You hear the imaginary voices, you've changed. You're being selfish. Wow, someone thinks they are too good for us now. And here's the kicker, sometimes those voices aren't even imaginary. But Carl Jung saw this coming. He once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Accepting yourself means accepting your inner villain, too, the part of you that gets tired of being a doormat. The part of you that wants to slam the door, not explain yourself for the 97th time to someone who never listens anyway. The part that stops performing emotional CPR on people who don't even want to breathe. Historians still argue whether Jung meant the shadow as literal repressed evil or simply the parts of ourselves we are trained to hide. Either way, here's the truth, the moment you begin to accept your shadow, you'll feel like a bad person. That's how deep the programming goes. You were taught that kindness means overextending, that love means losing yourself, that good people don't walk away, even when they are bleeding internally. So when you stop responding to emotionally manipulative texts, when you cancel plans with that friend who only calls you to vent, not to listen, when you finally say, no, I can't do that for you, your nervous system flares up like a guilt alarm. And yet, underneath that panic, something else rises. Peace. Not the unicorn rainbow kind. The unsettling kind. The wait, I don't feel like dying after saying no kind. Because here's the not-so-fun paradox, emotional detachment doesn't make you less human. It makes you finally human on your own terms. You're not cold, you're clear. You're not selfish, you're sacred. You're not distant, you're directional. You're facing forward now. Let's do a little real-life autopsy. Imagine you're at a family dinner. Your uncle makes another passive-aggressive comment about your life choices. Normally, you'd laugh nervously, make a joke, or retreat into your mashed potatoes. But this time, you don't. You don't clap back, either. You just look at him. See the insecurity behind the jab. And keep eating. No emotional reaction. No need to correct the record. Just internal detachment. Later, someone accuses you of being rude. You smile. Because you know what they really mean is, how do you not dance for our approval anymore? That's the shadow work in action. You don't explode. You don't freeze. You become water, still, clear, quietly dangerous. Here's a little Jungian riddle. What if your bad behavior is actually your soul asking for boundaries? The guilt you feel when you protect your peace? That's the emotional hangover of a lifetime spent in performance mode. You weren't born with that guilt, you were trained into it. Like a circus animal praised for jumping through flaming hoops while smiling politely. But what if your inner villain is just your inner self finally clocking in for work? There's a saying, if you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. Which is a poetic way of saying, if you're always the emotional sponge, you eventually rot. So yes, detachment may look cold to people who only knew the version of you who bled to keep others warm. You used to be a people pleaser. Now you're just a person. And being a person means being misunderstood sometimes. It means disappointing people who never saw your full self to begin with. It means choosing your sanity over their approval. Here's your dark humor dose. Emotional detachment is like unsubscribing from a toxic newsletter you never actually signed up for. Thanks for the updates on how I've failed you. Permanently deleted. Jung would tell you that individuation, his term for becoming whole, requires embracing all parts of you. Even the part that gets tired. Even the part that says, I'm done. Because the shadow isn't evil. It's exiled. And the longer you ignore it, the more it hijacks your life. It becomes resentment, passive aggression, self-sabotage, weird dreams involving flaming raccoons and your third-grade teacher. You know, the usual. But once you acknowledge it, you integrate, you evolve. You stop playing emotional dress-up for people who can't handle your truth. And when they say, you've changed, you say, I remembered who I was before you taught me to forget. You don't owe anyone access to your nervous system. And boundaries aren't walls, they are windows with locks. You decide who gets a view. You decide when to open up. You decide when to shut it tight and light a candle for your own peace. Because emotional detachment, real detachment, isn't the absence of feeling. It's the absence of over-explaining. It's the radical belief that your inner world is worth protecting, even if it means you look like the bad guy in someone else's story. Let them write it. You're not acting in their play anymore. You can't heal in front of people who keep reopening the wound. That sentence probably hit somewhere deep in your stomach, and not in the "oh, that's poetic" way, but in the "why does that sound like my childhood, my ex, and my last 3 friend groups" kind of way. Yeah, welcome to individuation. See, there's this deeply twisted myth we are sold, maybe from fairy tales, maybe from trauma memes, that healing means reconciling with everyone, forgiving every slight, and returning to the scene of your psychological crime dressed in emotional armor, smiling like a Hallmark movie character with a PhD in Zen detachment. Carl Jung would have looked you dead in the eye and said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that includes staying in the room where the fire started, thinking that maybe this time, the people who lit the match will hand you a fire extinguisher. They won't. Historians still argue whether Jung's more spiritual ideas about the self were based on Eastern philosophies or if he was just vibing with a lot of incense and inner turmoil, but one thing is clear, Jung believed you can't become whole while staying small for others. So let's talk real. Let's talk about the family member who can't look at you without seeing a version of you that never actually existed. The friend who only likes you when you're struggling because your shine makes them feel like a background character. The partner who says, "I love you," but only when you're conveniently quiet about your needs. You've tried to heal there, to explain, to be soft, to make your pain digestible, to take your rage and serve it like a side salad, lightly dressed, inoffensive, easily ignored. But healing is messy. It cries too loud. It sets boundaries at weird times. It doesn't wear a polite little name tag that says, "Hi, I'm working on myself, please be patient." And here's where it gets real. You cannot become whole in a place where you were trained to split yourself into pieces just to survive. There's an actual, biological reality to this. Your nervous system doesn't care about your family's approval. It cares about safety. And when it senses the same old gaslighting, guilt-tripping, and unspoken rules that once taught you to mute your emotions, it shuts down. Healing becomes impossible. Not because you're weak, but because your body knows better now. It's trying to drag you toward wholeness, even if it means burning bridges you were raised to worship. There's this moment that happens to nearly everyone doing deep shadow work. You realize that detaching from toxic dynamics doesn't just hurt, it feels like dying. Why? Because your trauma convinced you that chaos was love, that suffering was noble, that your ability to endure was your greatest trait. So when you walk away from the manipulative parent, the on-again off-again situationship, the friend who always has a crisis when you're doing well, you don't just feel guilty, you feel wrong. But you're not. You're finally telling your nervous system, "We don't live there anymore." And that message needs to be loud, clear, and sometimes repeated into a pillow while ugly crying and eating cereal for dinner. Because even when the people you leave behind say, "You're being dramatic," you know the truth. Dramatic is staying in places that kill your spirit just to be called a loyal. Let's make something crystal clear. You can love someone and still walk away. You can forgive someone and still never talk to them again. You can have compassion without access. It's not spiritual bypassing. It's spiritual boundaries. Jung understood this tension deeply. He believed healing wasn't about merging into a unified bliss blob with everyone. It was about integration. And sometimes integration looks like sitting alone on your kitchen floor, realizing you don't have to keep auditioning for love you've already outgrown. So here's your darkly funny metaphor for today. Healing in front of unhealed people is like trying to meditate in a mosh pit. There's elbows, screaming, someone's shoe hits your face, and you're expected to transcend. Yeah, good luck with that. You need quiet, space, a room of your own. Not forever, but long enough to hear your own voice again. Because when you're constantly surrounded by the people who saw you only when you were broken, who benefited from your silence, who mistook your self-abandonment for kindness, then every act of self-love feels like rebellion. And it is. You are rebelling against the emotional codependency you were taught to call connection. You are choosing awareness over approval. And yes, it will be misunderstood. You will be called cold, fake, too sensitive, too distant. That's the toll. But what's on the other side? Clarity, peace, the kind of laugh that bubbles up from a place deeper than performance. A spine that no longer collapses at the sound of disappointment. A no that doesn't require a 3-paragraph essay and a pie chart. Here's the final truth Jung would shove lovingly into your psyche. The people who truly love you will adjust. They'll evolve. Or they'll leave and make room for something better. You don't heal for others. You heal away from them. And one day, you'll look around and realize you're not lonely anymore. You're just surrounded by people who actually see you. Who don't flinch when you're whole, who don't shrink when you're clear, who don't confuse your peace with distance. You didn't become distant. You became free. Awareness hurts like hell, but you already know that, don't you? Because once you become aware, truly aware of what's been going on inside you, around you, and because of you, it's like someone flicked on a fluorescent light in a room you were perfectly fine stumbling through in the dark. And you're standing there, squinting, like, wait, that's what I've been living in. That's what I've been calling normal. That moldy emotional wallpaper peeling behind the childhood wounds and coping mechanisms I turned into personality traits. Yep, that's the room. Welcome. Carl Jung once said, enlightenment is not imagining figures of light but making the darkness conscious. And let's be honest, no one wants to make the darkness conscious. It sounds profound until you're alone in bed at 2:47 a.m., staring at the ceiling like a traumatized houseplant, suddenly realizing, oh, I was the villain in that friendship, wasn't I? Or wow, I've spent a decade trying to earn love from emotionally bankrupt people. Awareness is not some peaceful, incense-filled yoga pose with ambient flute music. Awareness is confrontation. It's raw, it's itchy, it's looking at your reflection and seeing not just your face, but your history, and deciding, without clenching your teeth, to stop lying to yourself. Historians still argue whether Jung's idea of the self was more rooted in mysticism or psychology, but either way, he saw awareness as the price of transformation, not the reward, the price. That's why most people avoid it. That's why we build emotional IKEA furniture out of denial, distraction, and drama. Because it's easier to binge shows about healing than to actually heal. It's easier to decode your crush text than decode your own abandonment issues. Here's what awareness does. It dismantles you. Not because you're broken, but because you've outgrown your scaffolding. Awareness is realizing that the coping mechanism you once called independence was actually hypervigilance. That your high standards are sometimes just fear in stilettos. That your intuition is occasionally just trauma dressed as prophecy. Dark humor break. Awareness is like finding out your emotional GPS has been using dial-up internet and the voice is your mother's, but now it's guiding you through your romantic life. In 300 feet, sabotage this relationship based on childhood pattern. Recalculating, and still you stay awake. Because there's no going back to sleep once you've seen the pattern. Awareness teaches you that you can no longer blame your past, but you also can't pretend it didn't happen. You must hold both. The tenderness of your becoming and the bloodstains of your survival. And that's the real work, holding contradictions. You can love your parents and acknowledge the damage. You can be grateful for a lesson and still wish it hadn't come with a side of betrayal. You can miss someone deeply and know with certainty that they have no place in your healed life. It's not tidy. It's not linear. Sometimes it looks like journaling under moonlight, and sometimes it looks like rage cleaning your apartment to death metal while whispering affirmations between subs. But here's the glimmer in the gloom. Awareness isn't pain for pain's sake. It's pain for liberation's sake. Think about it like this. You've been living in a haunted house. Every door creaks with old patterns. Every window rattles with subconscious beliefs. You thought that was just life. Then awareness walks in and hands you a flashlight. And yeah, what you see is horrifying. But at least you're not bumping into walls anymore. At least you know what you're dealing with. And little by little, you start cleaning house. Not because the house is bad, but because you finally believe you deserve to live in it awake. This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, the long, uncomfortable journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, whole, which means integrating your pain, your joy, your flaws, your wisdom, your inner child still hiding under the emotional table, and yes, your full-grown self who sometimes still Googles, am I the toxic one? You want practical advice? Okay, try this. Next time you're triggered, don't fix it, study it. Pretend you're an emotional detective with a notepad. Interesting. Why did my entire soul evaporate when she didn't text back within 10 minutes? Note to self, investigate fear of abandonment, likely formed in 1998. You laugh, but that's the work. Making the unconscious conscious, zooming out and seeing the machinery behind the meltdown. And when it gets too loud, because it will, remember this, awareness doesn't mean obsession. It's okay to take breaks. Go touch grass, pet a dog, scream into a pillow, bake banana bread and overanalyze nothing for once. Because the point of waking up is not to stare at your pain like a screensaver. It's to use that awareness to live more truthfully, more presently, more you. It won't make you immune to pain, but it will make you immune to self-betrayal. And that's worth the price of admission. You've probably fantasized about not giving a crap before. Not the numb, disassociated kind of not caring. Not the shut everyone out and dye your hair black while you burn sage and blast Florence and the Machine kind either. No, the informed kind. The kind of not giving a crap that comes from having met your demons, invited them for tea, and politely declined their influence over your life choices. The kind Carl Jung might have called individuation, but we'll just call peace with side-eye. You see, you don't stop caring what people think because you're suddenly enlightened and emotionally bulletproof. You stop caring because you've finally done the math and realized the emotional debt you've been carrying for the sake of approval isn't just expensive. It's bankrupting you. You've paid in silence, in guilt, in thousands of hours pretending to be the version of yourself that made other people comfortable. And in return, confusion, resentment, an identity crisis every other Tuesday. So here's what Jung knew and what you're starting to learn. Detachment isn't about becoming less human. It's about becoming less obedient to performance. Historians still argue whether Jung saw the ego death process as a structured transformation or a chaotic unraveling of the self. Spoiler, it's both. An ego death. Oh, it's not the cool spiritual TikTok moment where you journal in candlelight while crying aesthetically. It's the messy, silent realization that your entire personality might be a defense mechanism and that your confidence is just people-pleasing in stilettos. But ego death also sets you free, because the moment you stop trying to be liked, you start becoming honest. And here's the paradox: honesty makes you magnetic. Not to everyone, but to the people who can actually see you. The ones you don't have to shrink around. The ones who don't flinch when you say no. The ones who stay even when you're not entertaining. So how do you stop giving a crap? Let's make it painfully practical. First, learn to disappoint people. Yes, you read that right. Disappoint someone. Gently. With love. With clarity. Because your healing will inconvenience people who benefited from your silence. That's the price of evolution. Start small. Don't answer that text immediately. Don't explain your no. Don't justify your joy. Watch the panic rise. Watch the guilt crawl in. Then, don't act on it. Because the emotion isn't the truth, it's the training. Second, say things out loud that terrify you. I'm not available for that. I don't like how I feel after we talk. I'm still healing and I need space. These are not declarations of war. They are declarations of self. And when said with presence and calm, they are powerful, even when your voice shakes. Especially when your voice shakes. Third, create scripts. Seriously. Write them. Memorize them. Because in the moment, your nervous system will forget everything except how to freeze and smile. Here's a darkly funny script. You've changed. Yeah. That's what happens when you stop living on a steady diet of emotional breadcrumbs. You're being difficult. I'm being honest. You just liked me better when I was easier to control. Do you say it every time? No. But say it once and even in your head and something shifts. Because this isn't about being right. It's about being real. And the more real you get, the less external validation you need to survive. Want to stop caring what others think? Try this thought experiment. Imagine a version of you who didn't. Seriously. Close your eyes. See them. They walk differently, don't they? Shoulders looser. Laughs louder. Leaves the room when it turns toxic without over-apologizing. That version of you isn't fake, they are future you. And you build them with micro-decisions. Tiny rebellions like not smiling when you don't want to. Not answering questions that are none of their business. Not contorting yourself into emotional origami for people who would never do the same. You'll lose people. That's true. But here's the part no one talks about. You'll also lose anxiety. You'll lose chronic overthinking. You'll lose the nightly ritual of replaying every conversation like a courtroom drama. You'll gain time, breath, self-respect. And when the world around you starts to notice that you're no longer dancing for scraps, they'll respond in one of two ways. They'll adjust. They'll exit. Both are blessings. Carl Jung didn't teach people how to be loved. He taught them how to become whole and trust that love worthy of the whole self would follow. So yes, you'll keep feeling. You'll still cry. Still mess up. Still spiral sometimes. But you'll spiral consciously. You'll spiral with tools. With perspective. With humor. Because you are no longer operating from a place of needing to be seen. You are choosing to be seen by yourself first. And when someone disapproves, you'll feel the familiar pan and then nothing. Just air. Just space. Just a whisper of a former self who used to panic about being misunderstood and who now just shrugs and goes home. Because when you've met yourself in the dark, the opinions of people who haven't even begun their descent don't sting the same. You're not cold. You're free.